Number 5 on this list is a story from a man named Ryan Eastaugh. Ryan doesn't live there anymore, but he used to live in Bermuda, and that's where his demonic encounter took place. He was young at the time that he got his message, only 9 years old at that time, still living at home with his parents. One evening when he was lying in bed, he found it extremely hard to go to sleep, which was strange because he was a 9-year-old and usually he got into bed and slept like a baby. But he remembers that night that he couldn't sleep because he felt a strange sense of foreboding. Like that strange feeling like something's going to happen, or that you forgot something. You aren't prepared for something, a general sense of anxiety. He lay awake in his bed, staring up at the ceiling until he started to feel cold. A sudden chill immediately in the air. He said that it felt as if the room dropped by about 20 degrees. Scared and cold, Ryan wrapped himself in his blankets as tightly as he could. It was at this point though that the ceiling started to morph. The shadows turned into the walls of the ceiling and it started moving in unsettling ways as if something was coming out at him. The shadows formed what looked to be a dark, devilish complexion, but it kept moving so that it was never one thing for very long. Petrified and frozen where he was, Ryan could only stare up at the ceiling and hope that it didn't hurt him. The shadowy face was fixated on Ryan and held him down with its stare. Then, from apparently nothing, the shadowy ceiling figure said, and Ryan remembers these words to this day, "Next time will be the last time." And that was it. The demon left, the chill in the air disappeared, and Ryan was left in his bed alone. He obviously told his parents about it, but they didn't believe him, saying that it was probably a nightmare. The thing about Ryan's story though, is that after a while, he wasn't scared of these words, but actually thankful. If next time will be the last time, then I better make that time pretty freaking great. Whatever that may be in reference to. Now he's a man and leads a successful life, living with the mentality that today could be his last day, so I better make it bloody awesome. Number 4 on this list is Hotel California. Hotel California is right up there as being one of rock's best songs ever. I feel like I have a very special connection to the Eagles classic because I remember in 10th grade or sometime in high school, I had to do a project breaking down a classic song and looking at the lyrics and really evaluating them. I decided to do mine on Hotel California, and it was through this project that I learned something very interesting about this piece of music. Hotel California may have been partly written by the devil. Thoman says it's not only on Halloween that you can expect the devil to be up to no good in the background. For example, with the super hit Hotel California by the Eagles, when played in reverse, the secret message says, "Satan, he hears this. He had me believe, incredible or verifiable." Was the ruler of hell involved making the Eagles' greatest hits album the best-selling album of the 20th century in the US? Now this is the message you get when you play it backwards, but you don't even need to play it backwards to get some pretty weird messages just listening to it in general. The whole song itself is a complete trip. One line in the song says, "This could be heaven or this could be hell." Another line says, "We are all just prisoners here of our own device." And finally the song finishes by saying, "You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave." The whole song itself could be one big metaphor for hell, let alone the secret message in the song that you hear when you listen to it in reverse. What do you guys think? Was this actually the work from the devil? Number 3 on this list is from a woman named Bianca. In 2013, Bianca was living in New York City. This was before the days that Uber was a thing, so taxis were still the way to go. One Saturday morning, Bianca was on her way to meet her friends for brunch across town. She hailed a taxi and got in. The person driving was an elderly man who, based on his accent, sounded pretty Italian. They shared a decent conversation with one another right up until the intersection of 18th and 65th. The light was out here and there was a buildup of traffic. This was also a special intersection to Bianca because it was at 65th and 18th that her father got hit by a car and died 7 years prior. Then all of a sudden at this intersection, in the monotony of the traffic, time slowed down. The cars slowed, the sound slowed, everything got slower. It felt to Bianca like she just entered the movie Inception and she was in some dreamlike state. The old Italian man's head then swiveled around without the rest of his body moving. His face wasn't his actual face though. It was the face of her dead father. Absolutely stunned, Bianca started to tear up and was completely shell-shocked. Her father's face looked at her and said, "Bianca, move. Hell is not your fate, but you must move." The face turned back around and time started up again. Everything exactly how it was a minute ago. The Italian man's face, everything, the cars, all of it. Absolutely bawling though, Bianca got out of the car and had to throw up. She couldn't go to her brunch and she had to go home, walking the entire way. To this day, she doesn't know whether it was a demon, the ghost of her father, or what it was, but it shook her to her core, and she's never gone near that intersection or taken a taxi ever again. Number 2 on this list is a story posted 4 years ago by a man named Donald Wesson. Donald recounts how several years ago he was 11 years old and he had a friend named Ashley. Ashley had recently moved to his town from Wisconsin. She left Wisconsin initially though due to a pretty bad tragedy that occurred to her family. Her house caught on fire and her mother and sister both didn't make it out alive. Only her father, and her brother survived. This obviously created for a pretty rough upbringing, but Ashley as a whole was still a pretty nice girl and wasn't as damaged as some may suspect. Donald says though that he started to notice that when she came to school, she would have red marks on her ankles and her lower legs. He thought that maybe she could be getting abused at home, but after meeting her father and brother realized quickly that that wasn't the case. One evening when he was over at Ashley's with another friend named Eli, they were all having a sleepover. They went to bed and roughly 10 minutes into going to sleep, Ashley got up out of bed and went down the stairs. She was gone for about 15 minutes, and both of the boys roused themselves out of curiosity. They were going to go downstairs to check on her when she appeared in the doorway. She was holding a large butcher knife in her hands. Both Donald and Eli started to freak out a little bit and started trying to get Ashley's attention. But rather than show them any interest at all, Ashley takes the knife and starts stabbing the wall, chanting out some strange language as she does it. Scared for their safety, Eli starts to bawl, but this grabs Ashley's attention. She drops the knife and gets down on all fours and rapidly crawls to Eli. Donald very quickly kicks the demon that used to be his friend right in the face and grabs Eli and runs out of the house. They wait outside the home for roughly 20 minutes, but nobody comes after them. Then, very carefully, they head back inside, and Ashley is now fast asleep where she was before. Apparently, Ashley has no memory of that experience at all. I suppose this story was less about a message and more just about a scary run-in. However, actions speak louder than words, and I think that those actions were saying to get out. Now, number 1 is actually a story from a viewer that commented on the first part of this video. The viewer's name is Anna Kelly, so shout out to you, Anna. Thank you for commenting. Now, I do want to warn you guys, this story, from my understanding, is about the incubus demon. So it's not pretty. Anna writes, "This happened in 2008, and I still remember every terrible detail. I'd just gotten into bed and covered with a sheet when I heard a noise at the foot of the bed, the right corner. The mattress made a creaking sound, like it does when somebody climbs into bed. I looked, but saw nothing, but I felt it crawling closer. I closed my eyes tightly, hoping that it would go away. Then, I felt the sheet being pulled off of my body. I opened my eyes, and I saw the sheet being pulled by nothing. Then, the putrid smell of sulfur and rotten flesh hit my nose. It was gag-inducing. It could singe the hairs in your nostrils. Then, I saw it. It was in the form of a male, so I'll just call it he. Anyway, he was 7 feet tall and massive with 3 arms and 2 legs. His skin looked like layers of charred bits. He had only a few sprigs of coarse-looking brittle hair. His teeth were pointed and slimy, and his breath was a lot worse close up. He had no eyes, just black holes. I looked into those black holes. All of a sudden, all my emotions left me. I felt like nothing. I can't explain what it feels like to feel nothing. Then I felt the heavy weight of him on me. He pinned my arms at my sides. He put one claw-like hand over my mouth and said in an evil growl, "No one will hear you scream. No one can help you now." I found that I couldn't make any noise at all. I don't need to go into too much detail about what happened next, but it felt very cold and unforgiving. Well, the next morning when I got out of bed, I noticed my inner thighs were very sore, and there were red scratch marks on them. No human could leave those kinds of scratches with their nails. And it wasn't me. I'm a nail biter, nasty habit, I know. But that's the one and only time I've been attacked like that. It was my fault though. I have a heart necklace that I wanted to use to see if anyone passed away in my apartment. I let the necklace hang and went through the alphabet. It would be stiff as a board, but when I got to the letter J, it started moving. Clockwise, I think. Anyway, it spelled out Joanne. I was attacked not long after messing around with that stupid junk. I figured at least it wasn't a Ouija board. It took me a while, but with prayer and faith, I was able to cast out those evil things. Of course, there are still many other demons slithering around us in this world, and some target me for a different reason, though now I know how to fight them. And after that attack, I will not allow any conjuring items, tarot cards, crystals, etc. in my home. I definitely do not want to go through that ever again. No one should have to do that. And no, you are absolutely right. Nobody should ever have to go through that. That is quite the story. Anna, all I can say is that I really appreciate you feeling comfortable with sharing that. So thank you. Number 5 is the demonic encounter that a boy named Patrick Antle had. Patrick is currently 23 years old, but it has taken him several years to speak out about his run-in with a demon that happened when he was 17. Living at his parents' house in Cincinnati at the time, Patrick decided to sneak out one evening and go to a local high school party. The sneaking out process worked out totally fine and he made it to the party safely, but it was on his way back though that he had the scariest moment of his life. He believes that the time was around 2 a.m. in the morning and he was walking back the way that he came. The area that he was in was rural and there weren't too many houses that he passed by. However, when he turned a corner down the second last street before his own, he saw a house on the side of the road. This wasn't unnatural obviously, but what stood out to him is that he swore that there was never a house here before. He stopped and glanced at it and noticed that the garage door was open. Only a few seconds had passed when out of the darkness of the garage door 2 red glowing eyes appeared in the night. His initial instinct was to run, but right as he made eye contact with the red objects, his body froze up and he couldn't move. Standing stuck in the middle of the road paralyzed, Patrick got struck with an overwhelming fear that his life might end right then and there. The eyes remained fixated on him and after a few more seconds he heard a voice, but it wasn't coming from the garage, it sounded like it was coming from his own head. The voice was a deep, gravelly snarl that said, "Turn away now, or your body will burn in the deep fires of hell, and your soul will be tormented for eternity." Directly after that message had finished, his body freed up once again and he sprinted straight home. It took him over a month to build up the courage to go down that street again, but when he did, the home that he passed by, it was completely gone. Number 4 is from a woman named Kimberly Hagen. She had a run-in with a demon in a very old apartment building that she used to live in. Now, Kimberly occasionally dabbled with a spirit box and tried to communicate with past loved ones. It seems like this wasn't the proper location to do that though, because during this process, she awakened a demon. She says that at nighttime her bed would shake and she would be woken up to a nasty, dark, crow-like voice. The voice would speak to her and tell her some very nasty things, often saying that nobody loved her and that she was better off dead. It also tried to spark some unhealthy addictions. Kimberly said that she used to drink a lot to the point that she was ruining her life. However, after some solid rehabilitation, she managed to get clean. This demonic voice would continually tempt her with alcohol, telling her that she's better off drunk. Basically, any negative thought or habit you can think of, this voice would echo it to Kimberly in her apartment. She tried to go to spiritualists and seek their advice, ask them if there's anything that she could do to fend off this demon or get rid of it from her home. They tried a few different things, but nothing seemed to work or keep it out for good. After a few months of living like this, she couldn't take it anymore and she had to move and leave the demon behind her. She feels bad for whoever moved in after her, but at the end of the day, she had to look out for her own well-being. Number 3 on this list is the interaction that an Australian Reddit user had with a demon roughly a year ago. This man in his late 20s works at a bike shop selling cycling gear and other bike-related things. One morning he was going for an early morning bicycle ride at around 6 a.m. when he saw what he thought would be a hitchhiker on the side of the road. The hitchhiker was a woman and as he describes her, was one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. She looked to be in her younger 20s with bright blue eyes, long flowing golden white hair, and extremely fair skin. Our protagonist approached her with a bottle of water and tried to hand it to her, asking if she was okay. She just stared at him without any sort of reaction at all. Thinking she might be petrified, he asked if she is running away from anywhere, like can he help her? Which she does reply to, no. Okay, so at least she's somewhat responsive, but the guy is starting to get a little bit freaked out. For starters, she hasn't blinked once during their entire interaction, and she looks completely unfazed. He asks a follow-up question, "Where are you going?" To which she replies, "Right here." They are completely in the middle of the Australian outback at this point, without a single home or residence in sight. Why on earth would she be going here? It's at that point though, that he says he realized every other sound in the entire world was silent. Crickets, birds, the wind, all other white noise, it was completely blocked out, and as she looked at him, he felt himself slipping into some deep hallucinogenic trance. He describes it as if he were in a dream, but also completely awake. At this point he says that his mind felt completely disassociated with his body, but he could still see and breathe. What he was seeing now, though, was that same woman as before, but her eyes had twisted to the back of her head, and she was still just staring at him with the veiny whites of the back of her eyeballs. Standing there in a complete daze, he had no idea what he could do to fight back, but just as quickly as it all came on, it was gone. And immediately, the white noise of crickets, birds, the feelings of his body rushed back to him. However, the beautiful woman was gone. And when he gathered himself enough to check his watch, it was just over 3 hours since he had started that conversation. Number 2 on this list is another message received during an exorcism. A televangelist and priest was flown from the United States all the way to Russia to deal with what was considered to be a deep possession from a demon. The goal was for the priest to perform an exorcism on this person and free their body from the demon spirit. Leading up to this point, it had become clear to the family of this woman, who was a little bit older than 30, that she had become possessed. Strange noises would come from her mouth in languages that she isn't familiar with. Her eyes would appear completely bloodshot, and even if you looked straight at her, it felt as if she was looking through you. She would also start randomly convulsing with no warning to anybody at all. When the exorcist arrived in Russia, he didn't waste any time in getting down to business. He had a Russian interpreter present so that his prayers would be translated and he could discern what she was speaking back to him. At the beginning, the lady was screaming and crying, which was offsetting to begin with, but roughly 2/3 into the ceremony, apparently she reached another level. Her body started shaking uncontrollably, like her family had described, and her eyes rolled to the back of her head. And then, without warning, she started screaming at the top of her lungs in a language that wasn't familiar to the interpreter. Finally, she turned to the exorcist and said in a deep, male voice that was not her own, "This is my domain. You are not allowed here, and you will suffer the lake of fire for your heresy." After that, the demon abandoned the lady's body and the exorcism finished. This story is roughly 30 years old, and it was not told by the priest, but actually by the priest's son, who was brought with him on this trip. The son was 8 years old at the time, and now 30 years later, he still claims that this is the scariest moment of his life. Number 1 on this list is the story from a Reddit user named Pebble Thief. This guy was 20 years old when he had what he describes to be the scariest encounter of his life with a demon. Using his fake ID at the time, he decides to skip work and instead spend the day partying with his girlfriend. Before going to the beach for the day, they decide to start the day off right by getting a drink at the bar. Very nice. When they arrive, the bar is empty. It hasn't even hit 10 a.m. at this point yet, so it isn't unnatural to have nobody there. After a few minutes though, a man enters and decides to sit directly in between the pair at the bar. Pretty strange considering the entire place was empty. The Reddit user describes the man as being extremely well dressed and very proper, not your usual suspect for a midweek early morning trip to the bar. The man starts moving his fingers strangely on the table, which captivates our Reddit user right up until the man says, in a very strange accent, "I notice you're a man who pays attention to detail. I'm also a man who pays attention to detail." It's at this point that the 20-year-old realizes the characteristics of this man. Piercing gray eyes, long sharp fingernails, and the incessant need to keep licking his lips. Getting slightly fearful of the situation, he tells his girlfriend to give them a minute, which she does without protest, clearly understanding that something is wrong here. It's at this point that the man turns directly to our Reddit user and says, "You were supposed to go fishing today. If you had, I would have drowned you in that ocean." Not only was that exactly where he was supposed to be, but the demon finished his statement with an animalistic hiss. He then said to him, "You can call me Jimmy C. I jumped off the San Francisco Bridge years ago, and we've been watching you." At that moment, apparently the man then uttered some guttural-like shriek from a language that our 20-year-old could not understand. He decided at this point that I think it was time to leave, but before he could get out, the man stopped him and said, "The next time that you see me, I'll be driving a black Mercedes and the license plate will say Utopia." This incident happened over 10 years ago, and since then, Pebble Thief has been petrified of seeing a black Mercedes. But both he and his girlfriend swear that that story is true and believe wholeheartedly that they were dealing with a demon. Number 5 on this list is the Devil's Town. The Devil's Town is a place in Serbia that's basically a collection of very interesting natural forming rocks. Or at least we think it's natural forming. Mehana Mihajovic says the Devil's Town is one of the widely known places in Serbia. Situated between two ravines of the creepy names the Devil's Ravine and Hell's Ravine, there lies the spookiest natural monument. Over 200 randomly formed stone poles up to 20 meters in height. Almost all the poles carry the black cap from volcanic rock andesite, adding to the overall peculiar atmosphere around the place. Close to the locality, there are fresh mineral water wells and ruins of an old church. The mysticism of the Devil's Town Natural Monument keeps fueling the imagination of the local people. One of the widely known legends suggests that a long time ago, local people threw a wedding party for a brother and a sister that fell in love with little help from the devil's spells. God wanted to punish all the attendees and turned them into the stones where they still lay to this day. The other legend suggests that the devil's poles are actually local kids who refused to learn and decided to live an immoral life stripped of knowledge. It sure sounds like a great way to make your kids do their homework. So regardless of which legend you choose to believe in, this is evidence that the devil was once around here. As far as what sort of message this leaves behind, I guess you need to be the one to decide, right? Is this a way for the devil to just reinforce his legitimacy? Is this a way for the devil to instill fear in people? Is this a way for the devil to tell us that we should actually be fearing God? These are all interesting things to consider and think about when we're talking about the Devil's Town. I will say something and give the devil a little credit. If these rocks were actually formed by him in some devilish activity, then honestly, nice work, man. They're very cool and made a strong push to become part of the 7 natural wonders of the world. Maybe people decided to leave them out of that list though, because promoting something created by the devil himself might not be the best idea. Comment down below what you guys think this weird and creepy formation of rocks could truly mean. Number 4 on this list are the text messages that Stephen Rossetti received when performing an exorcism. Stephen Rossetti is a priest and psychologist and is a well-respected member in the community, having appeared on many talk shows before. Something that he's well known for is performing exorcisms. In fact, Stephen performs roughly 20 exorcisms per week and has an entire team that helps him do this. Seeing as his main objective is to rid the world of possessive demons, it's fair to say that possessive demons as a whole, they aren't too friendly to him. During one of his more recent exorcisms where he was dealing with a teenage girl, he and the family of that girl received some very threatening messages. The messages read, "Her torments start now, priests all night. While you and that friend of yours sleep, we will make her bleed." They also went on to say, "We're glad that she's away from you now." The strange thing about this is that the messages came from that girl's phone, but when they looked on her phone to see, the messages couldn't be found. Rossetti believes that this was the work of the demons possessing that girl, attempting to stop him from performing the exorcism. Having reportedly seen somebody get clawed by a demon during an exorcism before, I think it's safe to say that receiving threatening messages from them would scare the best of us. Number 3 on this list is the Devas. The Devas actually come from the religion Zoroastrianism and are part of that religion's demonic entities. If you're unfamiliar with that religion, then just know that it is one of the oldest religions ever and is still being practiced today. Well, there are tons of messages in scripture and artwork describing these demons that basically act as warning messages to all who may have the misfortune of running into them. Grunge says, traditionally Devas are thought to be the creation of Ahriman, an antagonist and equally powerful counterpart to the benevolent creator. In one of their religious texts, the Gathas, Devas are described as rejected gods with an affinity for evil who, for whatever reason, still hold sway with some followers. One of their chief character traits is an inability to discern truth from lies, making them at least psychologically adjacent and possibly directly related to most roommates that you've likely met on Craigslist. All kidding aside though, these things can be very, very dangerous, and many people believe that a lot of the work and scripture that talks about them, that was actually left behind from the devil. Purpose of doing this was to strike fear into people and make them start to distrust their fellow human. Number 2 on this list is the blood falls. Once again, we have a naturally occurring wonder that people believe is actually a hidden message from the devil. Let me tell you the geological explanation of this, and then I'll tell you the possible demonic explanation. Atlas Obscura says, roughly 2 million years ago, the Taylor Glacier sealed beneath it a small body of water, which contained an ancient community of microbes. Trapped below a thick layer of ice, they have remained there ever since, isolated inside a natural time capsule. Evolving independently of the rest of the living world, these microbes exist in a place with no light or free oxygen and little heat, and are essentially the definition of primordial ooze. The trapped lake has very high salinity and is rich in iron, which is what gives the waterfall its red color. A fissure in the glacier allows the subglacial lake to flow out, forming the falls without contaminating the ecosystem within. So that's the geological explanation. The one involving the devil isn't as calm and cool though. This legend says that a man died and was sent to hell. Now he got there and obviously didn't love where he was. The man was continuously tortured and mistreated, as we can all expect from being in hell. Well, apparently this particular man wasn't about staying here forever. One day he attempted a daring escape and actually made it pretty far. He found a gateway between hell and the natural world. This gateway led directly to Antarctica, where the falls are now. He made it back to our physical world, but then the devil showed up. The devil brutally mutilated and cut the man to pieces, creating a waterfall of blood. The devil then sealed this blood in ice as a warning and message to everyone left on Earth never to attempt to go in or out of hell. Finally, number 1 on this list is the Codex Gigas. This book often makes all of our lists when we're talking about the most haunted or most cursed books ever, and rightfully so. This book, written many, many years ago, was literally by the hand of the devil. Mental Floss says the book's sinister reputation stems from a full-color portrait of the devil contained in its pages and a legend about how the image got there. According to folklore, the book is the work of a monk, possibly Hermanus Hermitas or Herman the Recluse, who had broken his vows and been sentenced to be walled up alive in the monastery. He struck a deal to save himself. If, over the course of a single night, he could write a book containing all the world's knowledge, his life would be spared. When he realized the task was impossible, the monk sold his soul to the devil, who helped him finish the book and signed it with the now infamous portrait. Now, I'd love to tell you guys what message the devil left for us in here, but that would require me to read the book myself, which I have absolutely no intention of ever doing. Legends have been told of people becoming insane and losing their minds and all sense of reality after reading it. So, even if I did read it with the intention of relaying the messages to you guys, I don't know if I'd even be capable of doing so. It's been kept in Sweden's National Library and has been there for several hundred years. If you guys wanted to go and give it a read, I don't recommend it.